I used to believe I understood the boundaries of the world for walls, a roof, a map in my mind where every place had a reason to be. But the day I found that map, the one with Warehouse 42 scratched into it like an afterthought, that was the day those walls began to bend. It was at a yard sale on the corner of Ashford and 17th, a place that already smelled like dust and endings. The man selling the junk didn't look up when I approached his table. His skin was the color of paper left too long in the sun, and his hands shook when they moved. I almost didn't notice the folded paper under a chipped coffee mug, but something about the way it stuck out made my hand reach for it before I could think. The paper felt warm, not in a sunlight way, but like it had been clutched in someone's palm moments before, though I'd seen no one touch it. Unfolding it released a faint smell of mildew and rust. And there it was, a street grid I half recognized, drawn in fading black ink. Most buildings were labeled with numbers, but near the bottom, far from the familiar intersections, a bold, jagged scrawl read, Warehouse 42. No address, no street name, just that dot, and underneath it, in red pencil, someone had written, "Do not open, do not enter." I laughed. I shouldn't have. The old man's voice broke the air like cracked glass. "You keep that," he said, eyes still fixed on the ground. "No refunds." I didn't even remember handing him money, but when I walked away, my pocket felt lighter. That night, I spread the map out under my desk lamp. The light seemed to slide off the paper in strange ways, almost like the ink resisted being looked at directly. I traced the path to where Warehouse 42 should be, miles outside the industrial district, in a stretch of land that, as far as I knew, had been empty for decades. The more I stared, the more wrong it felt. Buildings on the map shifted positions when I glanced away and looked back. At first I thought it was just my mind playing tricks, but no, the distance between two marked points had changed. Curiosity, as always, whispered louder than caution, and there was something else. A weight in the air, like the map itself, wanted me to find that place. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that scrawled 42 burning against the inside of my eyelids. Somewhere in the darkness, I thought I heard the faint scrape of paper moving across my nightstand. Though I was alone. By morning, the decision was already made, though I told myself I was just checking it out. The kind of lie you tell. Before you cross a line you can't uncross. The map led me to the industrial edge of the city, where the roads broke down into cracked asphalt and weeds. Birds didn't sing here. The wind was a constant low moan between the abandoned factories, carrying a smell like oil and something faintly sweet. Too sweet. At the very end of the road stood a rusted chain-link gate, its padlock hanging open, as if someone had left in a hurry, or wanted me to come in. Beyond it, down a narrow path choked with dead grass, was a shape I couldn't quite bring into focus, a hulking silhouette against the grey sky. I checked the map one last time. Warehouse 42. The red pencil warning stared back at me, almost pulsing, and just then, from somewhere beyond that gate, I heard it, a hollow metallic clang, as if something inside had just moved. It was broad daylight, but my shadow, long and thin against the dirt, looked like it was leaning toward the sound, as if it wanted to go inside before I did. I wish I'd turned around right then. The gate was older than it looked, every link in the chain link fence coated in thick, flaking rust that came off on my hands in orange smears. It shouldn't have opened so easily. The metal hinges shrieked like something in pain, yet there was no real resistance. It swung just enough for me to slip through, and then, silence. Not the kind of silence you get late at night in a small town, with a faint hum of distant traffic or the whisper of leaves in the wind. This was absolute. A suffocating quiet that pressed against my eardrums made me swallow just to be sure I could still hear my own breathing. The gravel under my boots crunched far too loudly, echoing off the skeletal remains of long-dead buildings on either side of the path. My breath puffed in the cold air. Though the temperature had been mild only minutes earlier, I kept my eyes on the hulking structure ahead. Warehouse 42. Its walls were dull sheets of corrugated metal, some bowed outward, others collapsed inward, as if the building had been punched from the inside. The roof sagged in places, creating jagged shadows that reminded me of broken teeth. I took another step, and a faint metallic tap rang out from somewhere deep inside the building, like something small dropping onto a concrete floor. I froze, eyes darting toward the dark gash of the main entrance. That it wasn't an open door. It was a roll-up gate, halfway down, the gap at the bottom barely big enough for someone to crawl under. The steel edges were streaked with black stains that looked too organic to be greased. I told myself the sound could have been anything, a piece of old metal loosening, a bird dislodging debris, but I realized then that I hadn't seen or heard a single bird since stepping past the fence. The closer I got, the more the air thickened. Not with dust, it was heavier than that, like breathing through a damp cloth. There was a faint taste of copper on my tongue, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the air wanted something from me. Halfway to the building, I noticed something odd in the dirt, a line of faint depressions, almost like footprints, but wrong, too long, too narrow, and the way they curved, as if whatever made them had been walking sideways. I followed them, telling myself it was out of curiosity. That was the first lie. They led me straight to the roll-up gate. My heart thudded as I crouched, peering into the shadowed space beneath. The darkness inside wasn't like night. It was deeper, like the light just couldn't exist past that threshold. That's when I noticed the sound. Not the metallic tapping from before, but something softer. A slow, steady drag. Like fabric, being pulled across the floor. It was coming closer. I should have backed away. Instead, I leaned in. The smell hit me first. Old oil, mold, and something else. Something faintly sweet, almost like rotting fruit left in the sun. Then the dragging stopped. I waited. My breath clouded in the cold air, and then, a whisper nod. From inside the warehouse, from directly behind me, I spun around, scanning the empty yard. My pulse so loud it almost drowned it out. The faintest string of words, spoken like a secret into my ear. "You're early." The wind picked up, cold enough to sting my skin, and I turned back to the gate, but the gap was gone. The door was now fully shut, sealed tight. No sign it had ever been half open, and somewhere in that silence, I could still feel eyes on me. The thing about silence is, it's never truly silent. Your mind fills in the gaps. A faint hum, a trickle of imagined whispers, the phantom thump of your own heartbeat in your ears. But what I felt standing there, staring at the roll-up door, wasn't my mind filling the void. It was something else pressing into it. Something deliberate. I circled the building, boots crunching over gravel and shards of broken glass. The warehouse stretched longer than it had looked from the road, an endless wall of dented, corrugated metal. My fingers brushed it as I walked. The steel was freezing, almost wet with condensation, though the air around me was bone dry. Halfway along the eastern wall, I found it a smaller side door, the kind workers would have used to duck in without raising the big gate. A heavy chain looped through its handle, secured by a padlock so corroded it looked fused into one solid lump. I tugged it, expecting nothing. That's when I saw the glint at my feet. A small, tarnished key lay half buried in the dirt. My breath caught. It was warm when I picked it up, not body heat warm, but fresh from a fire warm. I couldn't explain it. I didn't try. The chain rattled against the door as I slid the key toward the lock, more out of impulse than decision. It shouldn't have fit. It was far too small for a padlock that size, but when the teeth slid in, the metal gave a reluctant click. The padlock snapped open like it had been waiting for me. I remember thinking, this is wrong. Not I shouldn't be here, but this shouldn't be happening. The chain slid to the ground with a metallic hiss, and the door gave a groan that shivered through my bones. The smell that poured out was thick, old dust, rust, and something sharp and metallic beneath it. I told myself it was just the scent of a long-abandoned building. I told myself a lot of things that weren't true. Inside, the darkness had weight. My flashlight's beam seemed to fall short, swallowed before it reached the far wall. The floor was concrete, cold and gritty under my boots, scattered with fragments of wood and scraps of paper too torn to read. I took 3 steps before it happened at the door slammed shut behind me. Not a slow swing or a gust of wind, it slammed, the echo ricocheting through the empty space. I spun around, fumbling for the handle. It wouldn't turn. My breath quickened, fogging in the beam of my flashlight. Then I noticed the chains. They were back, looping through the handle from the outside, padlock in place, the same corroded metal I had unlocked moments earlier. I don't know how long I stood there staring, the flashlight trembling in my hand. When I finally turned back toward the interior, my beam caught on something. A second door. It stood alone, not set into any wall, just freestanding, in the middle of the warehouse floor. Old wood, dark and scarred, with a brass knob, dulled, too green. It wasn't attached to anything. And yet, when I stepped closer, I saw the faint shimmer of chains wrapped around its other side. Chains I could see through the wood, as if the door were half there, half not. I reached for the knob. Before I could think, it turned. The chains rattled, not in resistance, but in anticipation. A breath, not mine, sighed from the crack as the door inched open. The darkness beyond was not the warehouse, it was thicker, alive. I stepped forward, one boot crossing the threshold, and just before my other foot followed, something whispered from inside, a voice like metal dragged across glass. Finally, if you've ever stood in a pitch-black room and felt the walls breathe, you know the kind of darkness I stepped into. The air on the other side of that freestanding door was thick, not just with dust, but with something that clung to my skin like damp fabric. The first thing I noticed was the sound. It wasn't a clear voice, not at first. It was a low murmur, like the shuffling of countless papers being turned at once, or the susurration of wind through a tunnel. But as my ears adjusted, the noise split into layers. Behind the static was whispering, actual words, and those words were circling me. My flashlight's beam faltered. The battery had been full when I entered, but now it sputtered like it was fighting to exist. The light barely reached the nearest surface, a wall of concrete blocks, sweat slick with condensation. The whispers grew clearer. A woman's voice to my left, a man's to my right, both speaking too fast for me to catch. When I turned toward the woman's voice, it stopped. The man's voice deepened, syllables stretching, as if mocking me for trying to listen. I stepped deeper into the space. My boots echoed differently here. The sound was softer, like I was walking on something that gave under my weight. I knelt, ran my hand along the floor, not concrete fabric, a carpet, no, too irregular, too sticky. I shone my flashlight downward. It wasn't a floor covering. It was dozens, no hundreds of photographs, overlapping edge to edge, curling, with age and moisture. Faces stared up at me. Every single one was looking directly into the lens, and every single one looked faintly familiar. One face froze my blood. It was mine. Not the me standing there in that moment, but a version of me caught mid-step, my mouth half open, as if I'd been speaking when the picture was taken. My clothes in the photo were the same ones I was wearing now. The whispers surged. The woman's voice was in front of me now, soft and urgent. You were here before. My heart slammed against my ribs. I told myself it was a trick of perception, that the sound was just bouncing off the walls. But when I turned, the wall wasn't where I expected it. The space had shifted. The corridor behind me had narrowed to barely a shoulder's width. The man's voice slid along the wall to my right. You'll stay this time. The photos beneath my boots began to crinkle, as if something was moving underneath them. I stepped back and heard a wet, tearing sound, like adhesive pulling away from skin. That's when I realized the walls were sweating. Drops rolled down the concrete, thick and dark. Not water. Blood has a smell you never forget once you've known it. I backed away, trying to retrace my steps toward the freestanding door. The flashlight flickered once, twice, then died, plunging me into black. The whispers didn't fade. They grew sharper, closer. I could feel breath against my ear now, cold and damp. Something touched my shoulder, not a hand heavier than dirt, a weight, firm and deliberate, pinning me where I stood. And from the darkness, right next to my ear, a new voice spoke. It wasn't male, it wasn't female, it was wrong. Don't look behind you. When someone tells you not to look behind you, your brain splits in two. One part freezes, obedient, terrified that obeying is the only thing keeping you alive. The other part is desperate to turn, to see, to prove to yourself there's nothing there. I wish I could tell you I resisted. I turned. For a fraction of a second, there was nothing but the dark, thick enough to swallow the memory of light. And then my eyes adjusted not to brightness, but to movement. Something was there. It wasn't shaped like a person. It was taller, thinner, with joints in the wrong places, the outlines shifting like smoke trapped in glass. And where its head should have been a smooth surface, as if someone had taken a photograph of a face and blurred it until it was featureless. It didn't move toward me. It didn't have to. The air between us carried something heavy, a sensation like my thoughts were being lifted out, examined, and put back in a different order. I stumbled backward until my heel caught on the edge of something hard. My hand shot out, touched wood, a crate. The shape in the dark tilted its head, not curious, but almost expectant. I dropped to my knees beside the crate, more to get away from its gaze than to open it, but my fingers found the lid loose. When I pulled it back, the smell hit me first. Paper, mildew, and something sharp underneath, like the tang of old film chemicals. Inside were photographs, stacks of them, tied with brittle twine, their edges curling from damp. I pulled one free. It was another face I recognized, not mine this time, but my neighbor from 2 houses down, Mrs. Green. Her eyes in the picture weren't just looking at the camera, they were looking through it, and the expression, it wasn't a smile, not exactly. It was more like she was holding something back. I flipped through more. A man in a suit I'd seen on the bus last week, a teenager I'd passed on the street, a cashier from the corner store, dozens of faces, all of them people I'd seen in the last month. And then, at the bottom of the stack, one final photo. Me. Same clothes, same stance, but not the same setting. In this picture, I was standing in the exact spot where I was now, crouched beside the crate, looking at a photograph. My breath caught in my throat. I looked up, the shape was gone, the whispers had stopped, and in the sudden silence, I noticed something I hadn't before. There were more crates, stacked high against the walls. They were splintered and stained. The nearest one was marked with a faint black stencil, unrecorded. I moved to it, hands trembling as I pried it open. Inside wasn't paper this time, it was a reel-to-reel tape recorder, the kind you'd see in an interrogation room decades ago. A single reel was loaded, the tape wound tight, written across its label in jagged ink, "Do not play." I stared at it for what felt like minutes, maybe hours, and then I pressed play. At first, there was only static, but underneath it, faintly, a voice began to emerge. It was my voice. "If you're hearing this, you've already opened the first crate. That means it's too late." Hearing your own voice speak words you've never said is wrong in a way I can't explain. My voice on the tape was calmer than I felt, slower, like I was reading from a script I didn't remember writing. They left it here because they couldn't burn it. The recording continued. The paper wouldn't catch. The ink wouldn't fade. "It's been waiting for you, same as it waited for me." The static swelled, drowning out the rest, and then the reel spun to a stop. I just sat there, the silence after my voice more unsettling than the voice itself. My hand shook as I reached to rewind it, but before I could touch the machine, I heard something shift behind me. It wasn't the shape from before. This was softer, a faint slide, like fabric over wood. I turned, and in the far corner of the room, where the darkness seemed to knot itself into something thicker, there was a small wooden table. On it lay a book, swollen with moisture, its cover the color of dried blood. I approached cautiously, the floor sticky beneath my boots. The book's leather cover cracked under my touch, and when I opened it, the smell of mold and iron hit me hard enough to sting my eyes. The handwriting inside was small and deliberate, each letter pressed deep into the paper. The first page read, "Property of H. Mallory, January 3rd, 1968. The entries were dated sporadically, sometimes weeks apart. The earliest pages described shipments coming in late at night, always unmarked, always unloaded by men who spoke to no one. Mallory, whoever he was, mentioned being told not to look inside the crates. Of course, he did. The following pages grew more erratic, the handwriting slanted, ink blotting like the pen had trembled. He wrote about specimens, not animals, not plants, but things that breathe wrong. He described noises in the walls, boxes that moved when left alone, and faces pressed against the warehouse windows, faces that didn't belong to anyone who worked there. Then came an entry from March 12, 1968. "They've sealed the lower level, said it was for safety, but I saw what they brought up before they closed it. A man, or what was left of him, covered in black film like he'd been dipped in oil. His mouth was moving, but no sound came out. I think it was someone I used to know." The next few pages were water-stained, the ink bleeding into indecipherable smudges. But one fragment stood out, scrawled across 2 lines in a different pen, darker and more recent. "If you find this, do not follow the stairs down." I don't know why, but that warning didn't feel like it belonged to Mallory. The handwriting was heavier, the pressure of the pen digging into the paper so hard it had almost torn through. My fingers left smears on the damp pages as I turned another dot, and then I froze. The entry was dated next week. It described me in perfect detail, my clothes, my height, even the time I had entered the building. The last line read, "He will find the key. He will open the second door." My stomach turned to ice. I flipped ahead. The next entry wasn't dated at all. It was just a single phrase, repeated over and over until it filled the entire page. "We are still here." I closed the book, heart pounding, and turned to leave. But between me and the exit stood the shape again. Only this time, it wasn't featureless. It had my face. It's one thing to see your reflection in a mirror. You expect it to mimic you, to move when you move. But this was wrong. The thing wearing my face didn't blink, didn't breathe. It was like looking at a photograph that had learned how to stand up. I took a step back. It didn't follow. Instead, it tilted its head just slightly to the left, as if listening to something only it could hear. That's when I smelled it. A sharp, metallic temps, like rust scraped from old pipes, but stronger, heavier, the kind of smell that coats your throat and makes swallowing difficult. Beneath it was something worse. The faint, sour bite of fear. Not my fear, exactly, but as if the air itself had absorbed the terror of every person who had stood where I was standing. the thing's lips. My lips parted, and though its mouth moved, the sound that came out was not my voice. It was the wet scrape of metal dragging over stone, layered with a whisper too low to understand. My skin crawled. I stumbled back into the nearest crate, the wood groaning under my weight. The thing didn't move closer, but I felt the temperature around me drop sharply, a deep bone-soaking cold. My breath fogged in front of me, curling toward it as if drawn by a current I couldn't see. Then the smell intensified, overwhelming, burning in my nostrils. I gagged and pressed a sleeve to my face. That's when I noticed the floor beneath. My boots was wet. I looked down. A thin stream of dark liquid was snaking across the concrete toward me, originating from somewhere deeper in the warehouse. It glistened in the dim light like molten ink, pulsing faintly, as if it had a heartbeat. The smell that metallic temps was coming from it. The thing in front of me stepped aside, clearing a path as if it wanted me to follow. I should have run, but curiosity will kill you slower than fear, and I think that's why it wins more often. I followed the stream, every step making the smell thicker, heavier. It led me to a section of the warehouse where the walls were different, darker, smoother, and sweating with condensation that dripped in slow, deliberate beads. The stream of black liquid flowed under a wide steel door, the surface of which was mottled with handprints. Not fresh, not clean. They were darker than the metal, sunken into it, as though whoever had touched that door had left a permanent mark. The handle was cold enough to numb my palm. I pulled. The hinges shrieked as the door cracked open, and an immediate wave of that metallic odor slammed into me, thick enough to taste. Inside was a smaller room, no windows, just a single hanging bulb that flickered in a slow, nauseating rhythm. In the center, a chair, and on that chair, a man. At least, I think it had been a man once. His skin was stretched too tight over his bones, blackened in places as if burned, but glistening wet in others. His head hung forward, and from his open mouth dripped the same dark liquid I had followed here. When I stepped closer, his chest rose. He was breathing. Slowly, painfully, he lifted his head. His eyes were gone. In their place were dark hollows that seemed to draw the light inward. His mouth opened wider, stretching impossibly far. And from that empty space came words that vibrated in my ribs. "It's still in you." I stumbled back from the chair, my heel striking the steel door. The man, or whatever was left of him, didn't move to follow. He just sat there, breathing that slow, rattling breath, the dark liquid threading from his mouth and pattering onto the floor in irregular drops. But even as I backed away, I realized the air in the room had changed. It wasn't just thick with the metallic stench now. There was another presence. I knew it before I saw it. In the far corner, where the flickering bulb's light failed to reach, something unfolded itself from the darkness. It moved like a shadow learning how to walk, stretching tall and impossibly thin. No face, no mouth, no eyes, just a smooth, pale surface where features should have been. The man in the chair let out a wet gasp, almost a sob, as the faceless figure stepped forward. It didn't walk toward him, it walked toward me. Each step was silent, but I could feel its weight in the floor beneath my boots, as if the concrete flexed under it. My mind screamed to move, to run, but my body felt pinned, every muscle trembling but refusing to act. It stopped just short of arm's reach, though it had no eyes. I knew it was looking at me. The absence of features was worse than any grotesque face could have been. It was as if the thing refused to acknowledge the human idea of identity at all. Then, without touching me, it leaned forward. My ears popped, like I'd stepped into deep water, and my vision blurred around the edges. In the middle of that distortion, a voice slid directly into my head. "You're wearing the wrong skin." The words weren't sound, they were sensation, cold fingers crawling over my skull from the inside. Behind it, the man in the chair began convulsing, his head jerking violently as if trying to shake something loose. The dark liquid poured faster, pooling at his feet, and from somewhere deep in his chest came a sound, a low, keening hum. The faceless thing straightened, slowly, deliberately. It turned its head toward the man, and the hum stopped dead. Number, sound, no movement. The body on the chair slumped forward, completely still. Then the faceless figure looked back at me, without a sound. It stepped backward into the shadows, each motion making it taller, broader, until its shape dissolved entirely, into the black. The light from the bulb seemed to grow weaker, pulling me back toward the doorway. I didn't remember leaving the room. One moment, I was staring at the empty corner. The next, I was standing in the main warehouse space again, my hands trembling, my breath shallow, but I wasn't alone. Somewhere in the distance behind the walls, maybe under the floor, I heard it. the sound of heavy, slow footsteps, and they were getting closer. The footsteps were deliberate, not the quick, cautious steps of someone exploring, but the slow, steady rhythm of something that already knew exactly where I was. I spun toward the side of the warehouse I hadn't explored yet, the beam of my flashlight shaking over rusted beams and collapsed shelving. My boots crunched on glass and debris, the sound sharp in the heavy air. The footsteps never sped up, but they never stopped. That's when I saw it in the far corner, behind a pile of broken pallets, a section of floor that wasn't concrete at all. The edges of the wood were flush with the rest of the floor, but the center had dark rings of moisture spreading outward, a trapdoor. The air above it was colder, and the faint scent of that same metallic temps rose from the gaps between the boards. But now there was something else, a strange, low vibration, like a faint hum, coming from below. I dropped to my knees and gripped the heavy iron ring set into the wood. It resisted at first, as if something was pulling down from the other side, but with a hard jerk it came loose, releasing a damp, cold breath from the darkness below. A wooden staircase descended into black. Mallory's warning from the diary echoed in my head: if you find this, do not follow the stairs down. I went down anyway. Each step groaned under my weight, the sound vanishing into the thick air below. The hum grew louder the deeper I went, until it was no longer something I heard but something I felt, vibrating in my teeth and bones. At the bottom was a narrow corridor lined with more crates, but these were different. They weren't wooden. They were made of thick, pitted metal, each one sealed with rivets and smeared with what looked like black tar around the edges. Numbers were stamped into their surfaces, but the sequence made no sense. Some were upside down, others backward, as if they'd been applied by someone who didn't understand numbers at all. I passed them slowly, the beam of my flashlight catching strange marks on the walls, deep gouges, some low to the ground, some far higher than any person could reach without a ladder. The corridor ended in a single, massive steel door. Unlike the others in the warehouse, this one wasn't rusted. It gleamed faintly in the flashlight's glow, though no light from above could have reached here. The hum was loudest here, a deep, resonant pulse that seemed to sync with my heartbeat. Pressed my palm to the cold surface, and immediately a shiver tore through me. Images, not mine, flickered through my mind in quick, disjointed flashes, hands clawing at the inside of a crate, eyes staring up from dark water, something with too many limbs dragging itself across a floor. The door was sealed with a heavy wheel lock. My hands moved without my permission, gripping the spokes and turning. The metal protested with a scream that felt like it went on forever. When the seal finally broke, a rush of air burst out, smelling of earth and rot. I stepped inside. The room beyond was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow, and scattered across the dirt floor were shapes, bones, some human, some not. Against the far wall, half buried in the dirt, was something that made my stomach turn. A machine, part metal, part something else. Tubes ran from it into the earth, and along its surface were objects that looked like skulls, but not quite. They were elongated, the eye sockets too large, the teeth too sharp. And in the center of the room, bound by chains driven deep into the floor, was a figure. Tall, faceless, the same one I had seen upstairs. It raised its head slowly, and though it had no mouth, a voice filled the room. You've opened it. You can't close it again. It didn't move toward me, but the chains trembled as if they were straining to keep something far worse from happening. My first instinct was to run up the stairs, through the trapdoor, and never look back, but my feet wouldn't obey. My body felt like a locked door, and something on the other side was rattling the handle. The air was colder here, yet my skin burned, and the humming that had been pulsing through my bones turned into something more complex, almost like whispering in a language I didn't know but somehow understood. You want to know, the faceless figure said, or maybe it didn't say it at all. Maybe the thought was just placed in my head, like a file dropped into a folder. Machine behind it hissed, and one of the tubes twitched as if something were moving through it. My flashlight beam wavered, catching glimpses of things I didn't want to see. More skulls fused into the machinery, some cracked open like eggs, others still wet. The figure tilted its head, and I realized the chains weren't connected to the floor at all. They disappeared into it, vanishing into that shifting darkness that made up its form. I couldn't tell if they were keeping it here, or holding the rest of it in. You've seen the boxes upstairs, the thought pressed on me, heavy as lead. Do you know where they came from? I didn't answer because the answer was already in my head. Unwelcome and impossible. Not from here. That the images came in rapid succession. Skies not like ours. Towers of bone and metal. Seas that moved, as if breathing. The warehouse wasn't built to store these things. It was built to hide them. The figure stepped forward. The chains didn't break, but they lengthened. Links sliding out of nowhere with a metallic rattle that felt too loud for the underground room. "You can walk away," it told me, though every syllable dripped with something that didn't sound like permission. "Leave this place. Pretend you never found it. You will not be the first to try." I wanted to take that deal. God, I wanted to. But something in me, maybe curiosity, maybe arrogance, made me speak. "What happens if I don't leave?" The darkness behind where its face should be rippled, and then the whispers in my head became screams. Not words, not even human, just the raw, deafening force of something tearing against reality itself. The floor shifted beneath me, the dirt pulling away as if the entire room were sliding into a deeper, endless pit. I staggered back, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly over the bones, the machine, and then the far wall where I noticed, for the first time, a door, a small one, rusted, barely visible. It was open just a crack. I ran. The figure didn't chase me, but the humming grew so loud that I thought my skull would split. The door was barely wide enough for my shoulders, and when I squeezed through, I felt something brush my arm. Not solid, not liquid, just wrong dot. The door slammed shut. Behind me, I was in a narrow tunnel now, brick walls damp and slick, the ceiling low enough to force me into a crouch. I followed it blindly, my light catching only fragments of old markings on the walls, numbers, arrows, some scratched out by deep, jagged gouges. After what felt like hours, the tunnel ended in another ladder. I climbed, each rung coated in grime, until I reached a hatch. When I pushed it open, I was back inside Warehouse 42, only it wasn't abandoned anymore. The aisles were stacked neatly with crates. Those crates and the air smelled faintly of oil and ozone. Somewhere above me, footsteps moved in a slow, deliberate pattern. I didn't stay to see who or what they belonged to. I ran for the front door, which this time wasn't rusted shut. When I stepped outside, the sun was up, but it wasn't the same day. I don't know how much time passed. My phone was dead, and when I charged it later, there were no missed calls, no texts. My last search history entry was from months ago. I told myself I wouldn't go back, but sometimes, at night, when everything is quiet, I hear the hum again, faint at first, then stronger, like it's getting closer, and I know it's not coming from outside. It's inside me now, and the worst part, I don't think it's alone. No final words, no clever escape, just this, no final sealed ending, because endings are for stories. This one is still happening,